This is CVPR 601, Professional Behaviors. Today we're going to be talking about AMSECT Scope of Practice. You can find the AMSECT Scope of Practice at www.amsect.org and click on the Resources tab. Well, if you're going to describe a scope of practice, you have to define the profession, and AMSECT defines the profession this way. Clinical perfusionist professional is an individual qualified for professional credentialing and academic and clinical education to provide extracorporeal patient care services. The scope of practice of the clinical perfusionist professional include those procedures, acts, and processes permitted by law for which the individual has received education, clinical experience, and in which he or she has demonstrated competency. So a couple of things. Individual qualified by professional credentialing, that would be from the American Board of Cardiovascular Perfusion, the CCP, Certified Clinical Perfusionist, and academic and clinical education, that's you're going to a accredited perfusion school. So these things qualify you to provide extracorporeal patient care services. It's interesting in which he or she has demonstrated competency. So how do we document and demonstrate competency? You know, one of the things that we do for the students, you go through our competencies up in the sim lab, and we actually measure and document that you achieve some level of proficiency in the fundamental skills of bypass. Once you're out on your clinical rotations, you will be evaluated by clinical instructors for your competence on each case that you perform. Once you're out in the perfusion community, your competency becomes somewhat assumed, but certain hospitals may actually have peer-reviewed competencies on occasion. So that's always a challenge in the field. How do you demonstrate competency? What line do you draw? So if you look at scope of practice, the generic definition is the range of responsibilities that determine the boundaries within which a physician or other professional practices. So a scope of practice is that it's outlining the boundaries within the boundaries of the responsibilities, and sometimes it can be sometimes these boundaries can overlap. If you think about a nurse practitioner and a physician assistant, they have very overlapping boundaries, but within each one of those professions there are boundaries of responsibilities that they are trained, educated, and credentialed to perform. You know, another example of that is physical therapy and a chiropractor. Both have a scope of practice. This scope of practice can overlap significantly. But again, each one has some delineated boundaries from within which they practice. The AMSECT scope of practice for clinical perfusionist professionals says that it sets forth to describe the breadth of professional practice offered within the profession. So go ahead and take a look at the AMSECT webpage, and you'll see they provide a scope of practice. I'm going to bounce out of this and go to the website, but for now, just look at this list. These are actual therapies, actual extracorporeal forms of extracorporeal treatment and support. And then over here on from 5.1 to 6.1.9 is our non-clinical responsibilities and professional performances. So it gives us a variety of clinical activities, but it also documents our scope in a non-clinical realm and in a professional realm as well. So let's take a look. I'm gonna bounce out to look at our scope of practice. Here's the AMSECT scope of practice. Again, you can find that under Resources, Scope of Practice. I want you to read this. It talks about its purpose. Again, that definition. But look through this list. I want you to as an assignment, identify something on this list that you have no idea what they're talking about. This list is exhaustive. It goes, goes things like thermogenic lavage, organ procurement, phlebotomy, a tremendous degree of range. I mean, the boundaries here are quite large. You can see things, a lot of extracorporeal and cardiopulmonary bypass words. These are anything with tubing and blood in them, and you can see even associated extracorporeal support functions. That's kind of like a clearinghouse basket. But I want you to look through this. In class, I want you to tell me what you don't understand here as far as the scope of practice, and we can discuss it there. Also, I want you to look at these non-clinical responsibilities and professional performance scope of practice. Tell me what you think about these. Do these really fit in? Is this a scope of practice? Or is this just trying to reinforce certain behaviors? Should these things be in our scope of practice? I want to discuss that in class as well. Consider that, think about that, maybe even go to another profession and see if things like this are included in scopes of practice. And we can have a conversation about that. I'm going to post a short quiz as well. I'd like you to go ahead and do that now, and let's have a good class, and we'll see you then. Bye-bye.